Hello and welcome back to Brick Speak. In this session, we will do a quick focused recap of major regional and global developments from the past 1 year that shape India's security environment. We will move through 20 slides, each one a single self-contained story connecting events to implications for India's strategic posture. The first question we are addressing is India-Pakistan escalation and Operation Sindoor. Critically analyze the sequence of events that led to Operation Sindoor. How did Pakistan's miscalculation resulted in India's strategic resolve? When the Pahalgam terror attack hit, it jolted the national mood and marked the moment India decided to act differently. For years, restraint had been India's trademark response. This time, the political leadership and military establishment were in complete sync. Within days, India launched Operation Sindoor, precise, time-bound, and carefully controlled. The strikes used standoff munitions and drones to destroy terrorist launch pads and logistic nodes across the line of control. Pakistan was stunned. It had assumed that India would hesitate, fearing escalation or global pressure. But what it encountered was calibrated force backed by narrative discipline. India also managed escalation better than ever before. There was no chest thumping, no prolonged combat, just a swift demonstration of reach and resolve. The operation revealed a strategic transition from strategic restraint to deterrence by punishment. It told the world that India would not absorb violence indefinitely, yet remained responsible enough to limit conflict. For Pakistan, the misreading was catastrophic. It discovered that terrorism had lost its leverage. For India, the lesson was equally important. Deterrence works only when backed by credibility, speed, and information control. Suspension of Indus Water Treaty. The decision to suspend parts of the Indus Water Treaty in 2025 was a watershed moment, literally and figuratively. For over 6 decades, India had upheld the treaty even through wars. By temporarily halting cooperation, New Delhi signaled that it no longer separates terror from trade or water from security. The message was not about denying Pakistan's share, it was about demonstrating that agreements have obligations on both sides. Technically, the move affected little on the ground. River flows continued, no dam gates were shut, yet the diplomatic tremor was felt worldwide. For Pakistan, dependent on those water for agriculture, the announcement was seen as psychological warfare. For India, it was a controlled use of leverage, exercising rights already allowed under the treaty but previously unused. Global reaction was cautious but not critical. Most countries viewed it as a legitimate warning shot rather than provocation. This showed India's growing diplomatic capital. Linking hydro diplomacy to counter-terrorism opened a new front of coercive statecraft. It proved that India can respond below the military threshold, yet still impose costs. It also highlighted how economic and ecological tools can reinforce national security objectives without firing a shot. China is expanding influence in South Asia. You may get a question on the subject. especially China, Pakistan, Bangladesh cooperation. In April 25, Beijing hosted an unprecedented trilateral dialogue with Pakistan and Bangladesh. Officially, it was presented as an economic cooperation meet. Strategically, it was an attempt to encircle India through what analysts now call the Bay CPEC arc. By linking Gwadar on the Arabian Sea with Chittagong and Paira in the Bay of Bengal, China aims to create a dual coast presence flanking India from both sides. Pakistan joined out of dependence, Bangladesh out of opportunity. For Dhaka, Chinese infrastructure funds looked tempting amid slowing growth. For Beijing, it was a chance to test India's diplomatic bandwidth. India's response was deliberately measured. Instead of reactive protests, New Delhi reinforced its own initiative, BIMSTEC, Sagar, and regional grid connectivity. The idea is to compete through better transparency, not louder propaganda. The trilateral showed that China's challenge is not only military but also economic and informational. India must ensure its eastern maritime flank from Andaman to Bay of Bengal stays integrated into its strategic calculus. The counter to encirclement lies in the building trust-based networks that make China's offers look risky, not rewarding. India's neighborhood policy gains and gaps. India's neighborhood first policy began with strong momentum, but by 2025 showed mixed results. Relations with Bhutan remain model. Cooperation with Bangladesh continues despite hiccups, yet friction with Maldives and political uncertainty in Nepal underline a recurring truth. Influence in South Asia is fluid. The region's politics are now driven by domestic populism, social media, and the lure of Chinese funding. India's challenge is to stay engaged even when governments unfriendly to it come to power. Economic projects need to be depoliticized and people centric. The success of digital payments, vaccines, and disasters has created goodwill, but sustaining it requires patience. For India, the real test is consistency. Every vacuum invites either China or smaller powers seeking leverage. The tone of diplomacy must evolve from big brother to reliable partner. Nepal street filled with restless youth, angry over corruption, unemployment, and the ban on TikTok. What began as a protest against censorship turned into a generational revolt against the old political order. These demonstrations weren't anti India, yet they mattered deeply to New Delhi. Any prolonged instability in Nepal affects India's open borders, trade routes, and migration flow. China watched the protest nervously. Its influence in Nepalese politics faced popular rejection. India maintained a cautious stance, supporting democratic stability but avoiding overt involvement. The aim was simple: let internal correction happen without letting external manipulation creep in. The Zenzi uprising symbolized a shift. Young Nepalese want modern governance and digital freedom more than geopolitical slogans. That's a long term advantage for India if it plays its cards well. Strategic denial and Nepal factor. Strategic denial means quietly preventing an adversary from gaining influence in spaces that affect your security. In South Asia, no case explains this better than Nepal. It sits between India and China, geographically small but strategically pivotal. Whenever India relaxes attention, China steps in with roads, rail links, and depth diplomacy. For India, the goal is not domination but balance, keeping Nepal within India's economic and cultural orbit so that it doesn't become a strategic outpost for Beijing. India's tools are subtle: development aid, power trade, cross border railways, scholarship, and intelligence cooperation. The soft power layer is cultural familiarity. Millions of Nepalese work in India and our army share the Gorkha tradition. These links form the non negotiable depth of the relationship. In 2025, as protests shook Kathmandu, India's restraint reflected mature statecraft. It neither propped up nor undermined the government. Instead, it focused on preventing any Chinese exploitation of the chaos. Implications on security: strategic denial ensures the Himalayan frontier stays quiet without overt coercion. If friendly or at least neutral Nepal gives India political depth, secure trade routes, and denial of Chinese intelligence staging grounds. Losing influence in Nepal would mean allowing an adversary direct access to the Gangetic Plains doorstep, something history has shown India can ill afford. The India Bangladesh transshipment episode. The decision in April 2012 The decision in April 2025 to withdraw the transshipment facility for Bangladesh exports through Indian land routes was technical in appearance but political in effect. India justified it on the grounds of misuse of facilities and unequal cost, but Dhaka perceived it as an unfriendly signal. Within weeks, Bangladesh began exploring alternate corridors through Chinese-built ports at Chittagong and Paira. For India, the episode underlined how even minor trade adjustment can echo loudly in diplomacy. Bangladesh is not merely a neighbor, it's a gateway to India's northeast and a key partner in coastal security. Economic irritants, therefore, have strategic outcomes. The wiser course is to reopen trade channels through structured negotiations that reassure Dhaka of mutual benefit while ensuring compliance. Economic coercion rarely works with neighbors who have options. What works is credible partnership backed by respect. If trust weakens, China's footprint expand in the Bay of Bengal, reducing India's maritime space. The lesson is straightforward. Economic leverage must be exercised with empathy. Neighborhood leadership is sustained not by pressure but by predictability. Rebuilding trust with Bangladesh. After the transshipment setback, India faces the task of mending fences with Dhaka without appearing defensive. The solution lies in reconnecting trade and security into one narrative of shared prosperity. Both nations depend on each other's stability. India needs a cooperative Bangladesh to secure its northeast. Bangladesh needs India for transit, power, and market access. Initiatives like joint industrial zones in Tripura, cross border energy grids, and the coastal shipping agreement should be accelerated. Security cooperation against smuggling, radicalization, and maritime piracy should also continue quietly below the political radar. What matters most is tone. Public messaging should highlight partnership, not patronage. India must make Bangladesh feel indispensable, not dependent. A strong India Bangladesh relationship anchors peace in the Bay of Bengal, supports counter terror efforts, and limits Chinese naval access. Economically, connected borders are easier to secure than militarized ones. Rebuilding trust is therefore not a diplomatic nicety, it is a security necessity. Climate change from environmental to security threat. The summer of 2025 turned the India-Pakistan plains into a furnace. Temperatures above 50 degrees, crippled power grids, dried crippled power grids, dried rivers, and displaced thousands. For the first time, the armed forces were mobilized not for war, but for water. This was the moment when climate ceased to be background issue and became a national security challenge. Extreme heat, erratic monsoons, and glacier melt threatens not just agriculture but also operational readiness in high altitude sectors. Supply lines, ammunition depots, and troop endurance all depend on weather predictability. When the environment destabilizes, so does security. Climate stress also fuels migration, unemployment, and social unrest, conditions that adversaries exploit for propaganda and recruitment. Thus, environmental fragility translates into internal vulnerability, building climate resilience into national security. Addressing climate security requires institutional change, not slogans. The first step is to early warning integration using ISRO satellite and AI analytics to predict floods, droughts, and glacier bursts. The second is force readiness, training troops and re-engineering logistics for extreme heat and cold. The third is regional cooperation through BIMSTEC and the Indian Ocean Rim Association. India can lead joint disaster management frameworks. Myanmar's civil conflict and India's border challenges. Across our eastern frontier, Myanmar has been in turmoil since the 2021 coup. But by 2025, the conflict reached a new intensity. Resistance groups have taken control of large areas, particularly in Xinjiang and Chin states, and China has emerged as the only power talking to both sides. For India, this chaos is not, it directly touches Mizoram and have streamed across the border. Armed smugglers operate in the same forest that host insurgent remnants, and projects like the Kaladon multimodal corridor and India Myanmar Thailand highways have slowed to a crawl. The Indian security establishment faces a complex dilemma: how to support democratic forces without alienating the military junta, which still controls Myanmar. If we disengage, China fills the vacuum. If we overengage, we risk entanglement. The solution, therefore, lies in calibrated pragmatism, quiet humanitarian assistance, continuous intelligence coordination, and development projects that benefit border population on both sides. The Myanmar frontier is the lifeline of Northeast. Instability there can turn into sanctuary for arms traffickers or insurgents, undermining peace in our border states. Stability in Myanmar, even if partial, directly contributes to stability in India's northeast, making it an indispensable component of our internal and external security. India's policy towards Myanmar has always been balancing act, guided by realism more than ideology. Supporting democracy is important, but geography dictates engagement with whoever holds power in Nepal. In 2025, New Delhi maintained contacts with the junta while continuing humanitarian aid to conflict hit civilians through local agencies. The dual track approach reflects a simple truth: India cannot afford to let Myanmar become another playground for China. Beijing's influence grows every time India hesitates. Its new economic corridor projects from Yunnan to Kafu port shows how it converts crisis into opportunity. India must therefore stay engaged, not as a patron, but as a neighbor whose peace depends on Myanmar's coherence. At the same time, India's army and intelligence agencies must secure a border from spillover violence. Coordinated surveillance, fencing in critical stretches, and cooperation with local ethnic medias on both sides are essential. Balanced engagement preserves influence without moral compromise. It keeps the gateway to Southeast Asia open, protects India's infrastructure projects, and ensures the Northeast remains connected to the broader Northeast vision. In short, it turns proximity from a problem to an asset. Pakistan's deadliest year, the internal unraveling. By 2025, Pakistan found itself facing the worst internal violence in over a decade. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan (TTP) re-emerged with unprecedented ferocity, while Baluch separatists carried out coordinated attacks on military convoys and Chinese installations. The Islamic State Khorasan province struck inside major cities, turning security forces inward. The Durand Line became a war zone with Pakistani and Afghan troops trading artillery fire. Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan was playing havoc on the streets of Islamabad and Rawalpindi. Economically, the country was on life support, foreign reserves dwindled, inflation soared, and public frustration exploded into protests. The military tried to control both politics and religion but ended up alienating both. The phrase cultivated irrationality, once used by scholars to describe Pakistan's mindset, now looked prophetic. India's challenge in 2025 is no longer facing a conventional invasion. It is managing uncertainty as far as Pakistan is concerned. A fractured Pakistan means multiple possible crises. Pakistan, sudden refugee flows through Rajasthan and Punjab, cross-border terrorism used to distract public anger, or false flag skirmishes to unite its population. India's answer must be layered readiness. Intelligence fusion across agencies is crucial. Every signal from chatter in Balochistan to movement near the LOC must be correlated in real time. Force posture should remain defensive but dynamic, capable of quick escalation if provoked. Civil military coordination inside India also becomes vital, as information operations and narrative warfare accompany physical threat. River-basin diplomacy and trans-boundary water security. In South Asia, water politics is the new frontier of strategic competition. Rivers like the Brahmaputra, Ganga, and Teesta do not respect borders. They connect or divide depending on how wisely nations manage them. With population rising and glaciers retreating, the value of water is now strategic, not just for agriculture. India shares 54 rivers with Bangladesh, several with Nepal, and major trans-boundary flows with China. Every dam, barrage, or diversion becomes a potential flashpoint. The 2025 discussions on Teesta water sharing agreement again highlighted how local politics can derail regional cooperation. For India, managing river diplomacy requires a mix of engineering, negotiation, and perception. Data transparency, early warning systems, and equitable sharing reinforce goodwill, secrecy, or unilateral moves invite suspicion. Control of upstream resources offer leverage but also responsibility. A reputation for fairness strengthens India's moral authority and reduces opportunities for adversaries to mobilize smaller neighbors against it. China's upstream dam on the Yarlung Sangpo. China's dam building on Upper Yarlung Sangpo, which becomes the Brahmaputra in India, has emerged as one of the most serious non-military challenges to India's security. Since 2024, satellite imagery has confirmed large hydropower projects near the Great Bend, Namcha Barwa, where the river drops from Tibet into Arunachal Pradesh. Beijing claims these are purely for clean energy, but New Delhi sees something larger: control of water flow as strategic lever. The concern is not that China will suddenly divert the river, which is technically difficult, but that it can regulate seasonal flows, causing floods in monsoons and shortages in lean months. Such capability gives Beijing a non-kinetic pressure tool during crisis. The absence of a binding water sharing treaty makes the problem sharper. India's counter must combine technology and diplomacy, independent hydrological monitoring using satellites and sensors, sharing data with downstream neighbors like Bangladesh, and raising the issue in environmental forums where China cannot dismiss it as bilateral. India China border posture from reaction to readiness. Since 2020 Galwan clashes, India has quietly rewritten its Himalayan playbook. Between 2024 and 25, new roads, tunnels, bridges, and advanced logistic hubs came across Ladakh, Arunachal, and Uttarakhand. Fiber optic links and satellite connectivity now link forward posts that once relied on radio silence. The era of reactive defense is over. The new doctrine is permanent readiness. The infrastructure surge does more than shorten response time, it boosts the morale. Troops now know that reinforcements and supplies can reach within hours, not days. Airfields at Neoma, Theos, and Tutik can handle transport aircraft round the year. China, meanwhile, continues its infrastructure race on the Tibetan Plateau, building dual use air bases and highways. The contest is therefore not about occupation but about endurance. Who can stay longer and operate smarter at high altitude? The technical race, sensors, algorithm, and information dominance. Modern competition between India and China is less about troops and more about who controls information. China has poured vast resources into quantum sensing, passive radar, and electronic warfare systems designed to spot stealth aircraft and disrupt communications. It is using AI to fuse massive sensor data, creating what its strategists call cognitive battle space awareness. India has begun catching up by investing in AI enabled decision support systems, counter EW shields, and homegrown surveillance network like the Surya and Ashwini radars. The Defense AI Council's new projects with Bell and DRDO aim to create modular, resilient data ecosystem. The critical challenge is integration, making sure land, air, and cyber systems talk to each other securely. The future battlefield will belong to the side that sees first, decides faster, and strikes smarter. Connectivity as an instrument of power. Look around the subcontinent, you will notice that concrete has replaced cannons as the marker of power. Highways, railways, ports, and digital corridors now define strategic reach. China's Belt and Road project have already stitched Pakistan, Nepal, and Myanmar into a network of dependence. For India, connectivity is no longer a development slogan, it's a geopolitical weapon. Projects like the India Myanmar Thailand Highway, Chabar Port Link, and Sagarmala initiative are designed not only for commerce but also for strategic access. Each kilometer of road to the northeast or each optical fiber line to the Andaman expand India's influence without firing a shot. However, the execution gap remains India's Achilles heel. Delays erode credibility, and that's where China gains ground. India must treat infrastructure deadlines as national security commitments, not administrative goals. Economic corridors and strategic stability. Economic corridors are no longer mere trade routes, they are arteries of geopolitical influence. The international north south transport corridor linking India with Iran, Russia, and Central Asia, the Chabar port project connecting Afghanistan, and the BIMSTEC grid linking the Bay of Bengal region all serve dual purposes prosperity and power projection. Every container that moves on these routes represents reduced dependence on rival choke points and enhanced strategic autonomy. In a world divided into competing economic blocks, corridors translate into sovereignty. They create jobs at home, partnerships abroad, and opinions in crisis. For India, ensuring these routes remain open means protecting sea lanes, securing energy supplies, and maintaining credible presence from the Arabian Sea to the Malacca Strait. The Armed Forces Logistic Doctrine now explicitly include corridor security as part of peacetime deterrence. With this, I come to today's session. These 20 narrations are meant for last minute consolidation. If you read or hear them sequentially, you will notice a rhythm. Each story begins with a trigger event, explains context, and ends with what it means for India. The notes are available. After some time, I will put the link in the description column. That brings us to the end of quick reconnaissance of past year. If there is one takeaway, is that awareness is the first layer of preparedness. The world around us is changing fast through climate, technology, and shifting alignments. Keep these narratives handy. They are not just for exams, they are for command decisions in real time. Thank you and stay curious because in security, knowing is half the battle. With this, I come to the end of today's episode. You requested to please like, share, and comment. All the best for your upcoming exam. Jai Hind.